it's kind of like being it's almost related to AI now, a robot doing only XYZ. But the bullet in the ceiling still I question, and the motivation. And I think if David was really this depressed or whatever, he would have just went out in the backyard and ate his gun. He wouldn't take it his family.
Spot on with that, and bringing up these types of things, which a lot of the general public still doesn't think we're being sprayed and such. But I digress. You can call them what you want. I say geoengineering, but that just gives us kind of the Looney Tune look, like the flat Earth look, that type of thing. When we talk about that, but I've always, in the back of my head, I always thought, man, this guy, he just got all the funding he needed. He was charging straight ahead to make this movie, and then suddenly all this stuff didn't add up. It added up to somebody who just freaking had a flip switched in his head. I don't know.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but a case I didn't work it, but my old boss, Don Crutchfield, was the private investigator to the stars. His old man was a wheelman. He was on the wrong door raid with Sinatra, DiMaggio, and Lawford when they were spying on Marilyn Monroe in the 40s. So I go back a ways on the LA wheelman PIs. But look at his last case before he died. It was the Gary DeBoer case, where he was a screenwriter and he wrote. I think he didn't do Terminator, but he did one of Arnold's movies. They called the screenwriter with no hands. They found him in outside Riverside in an aqueduct 2 years later with no hands. There's something methodical religiously or whatever with no hands, and that's how Kamel was, and David had lost a hand. There's that's a sign. That's a message. And Gary DeBoer, they found him in the aqueduct with no hands, but they said it was an accidental crash.
Sure. Yep. Very familiar with that. I've always thought, are we hurting the case or helping the case, bringing up the direct energy weapon?
I think people need to be educated on that, and that and like Matthew will tell you that's 30-year-old technology.
Right.
It's
probably older, right?
Yeah. That's a whole other podcast. You can
right.
It's some of the stuff that they're showing us now for these weapons, for these different types of control over people is nothing new. It's just been improved over the years.
Right.
I mean, we were doing mind control experiments on soldiers back in the 20s and 30s. So that way, not sleep and continue the mission, but they were having issues with it because you've seen in TV shows and different movies and comic books, if you take away sleep, soldiers retaliate and they break down. And
that's why with Hitler, when he got everybody, when they had the speed, I forget it was started with the Petrodrone or whatever, and they got everybody on there. And after the Blitz, they found a lot of Nazi planes that had crashed that were shot down. Is because they were so sleep deprived over like 4 or 5 days, they became lousy pilots. And that if you look into the meth and amphetamines when hit, I mean that started back in like 2019, 27, and that's what they did.
Amphetamines, meth, right?
Yeah.
You can also justify that with the Air Force pilots. I can't remember the time frame, but the Air Force pilots that fired on their own while in country, I think it was either Iraq or Afghanistan, and they admitted to being on go pills.
Oh yeah.
Controlled Adderall.
A friend of mine was a pilot with Air America back in the day, and they called them greenies, but they're not going to, and we're talking C-130s and stuff, but they're not going to put you in a fighter plane if you're tired. And this is a $500 million, vehicle. You better be wide awake, but every not to get off the subject, but every war with every infantry and everything else had something to boost them. Even we did. During Vietnam, I know guys, they said that their ammunition guy and the M60 behind them, he'd line out Bismarcks of meth, and because that's the only way they could go in there and survive in the jungle, and it made them alert. I mean, they paid for it later with their habits, but that's the only way they survive,
Yeah, Stephen, it's impossible to get off topic.
Well, let me.
David Crawley covered all these topics. That.
Let me attempt this because I do want to hear from Catherine here because I think Eric brought up a great question that Catherine, I'm sure you've heard many, many times. Was David Crowley under mind control? If he was, okay, then, you know, any thoughts on that?
And yeah, because I spent a lot of time studying psychology in college. That's the thing that people don't understand is a human mind is very, very strong. It takes a lot not only to break the body, but to break the mind. And you know, they watch movies like Mentoring Candidate and they're like, oh, that's it, they're perfectly normal and everything's great, and then they get this one word and they all of a sudden they turn into this killing machine. That's not really how it works. There usually you will see something different in a behavior. They will start to either get real paranoid, or you'll see a change like what Matthew was saying, which was I wanted to ask Matthew. It's like there are videos of David, you know, either speaking at the Ron Paul things or just being interviewed, and that came pretty close before the death. So by watching him do these videos, do you see anything different? Do you see a man who all of a sudden looks crazy?
No, he was thoroughly excited. He's a creator, an artist who's on his way. I mean, for anybody who's been in the industry or working in film or animation or video games, when your game or your film comes to light and people are actually interested in the story and producing it and putting money into it, that is a huge step in the industry. So I saw no change in him.
That's a great point she brought up, though, because you had said yourself, Matthew, that you didn't have contact with him for a couple of weeks, and towards the end, when it seemed like the people were noticing a lot of changes in him. David Crowley was being paranoid about people around him, which should be, because with all due respect, he should be getting paranoid around about the people around him at that time. But some of
the people, right?
So, Catherine, as far as what you had just said, this is a guy who we did see, and you guys have shown it a decline, or not a decline, but a definite change of personality in the last.
It was a change in priorities. I think the only thing I see different, in his quote unquote personality is and he states this in his own journal. He's like, okay, I'm cutting ties with these people who are just trying to suck things from me. They want to ride on my coattails. They want me to take them to LA. They want to get famous because of my work. And I'm not doing that anymore. I don't need you people. And that is a far cry from someone who,
right. I agree.
Yeah,
right. That's the person who's realizing what's going on around him.
Yeah, but you know, I mean, I just got off a pitch with 2 projects after the Hulu deal and everything. It's just to get a pitch in Hollywood is a huge step for any project. To sit down with the producers that want to take a shot at you, whether it goes or not. I mean, that's like 10% of the people that write screenplays. I mean, everybody in LA has a screenplay. Every waitress has a screenplay.
Right.
But to get the pitch and then to get moving on, it's really hard to get a green light. My buddy Eddie Barbini just did the Fauci thing for Masterpieces on PBS, and I pitched him a couple projects 2 weeks ago. One of them was a Crowley case we're going to come up on. And after this Fauci thing, which I thought he's going to get an Emmy on it, I guarantee it. He told me they don't even have a secondary market that's interested after he just launched on PBS with Fauci, the biggest guy in the world. What does that tell you? David broke barriers that people don't understand. It's huge. And the other guys were on his coattails that had no idea what it takes to do that.
Yep.
Yeah, and exactly. And all those guys who were, when you're looking at the narrative, who is it that is saying that David went crazy and David snapped and he was going down this dark rabbit hole? All the ones that he was picking aside. Yep. Every single one. He's like, nope, you're out of here. I'm getting rid of you. And they're the ones who now, and to have so many people follow this narrative and go, oh yeah, see, so-and-so, Danny says he was crazy. Sean said he's crazy. His own family. Well, yeah, these are all people who wanted stuff. And he said, no more.
Yeah, absolutely.
You look at the mics, you look at Hollywood, and they're all like, this was the most put together man we ever saw. But do they want to pay attention to that? No, because it doesn't fit the narrative.
And I can add to that because as serving with David as him being one of my NCOs, one of his quintessential parts of him was that he was very organized. He was very on point with everything he did in the military, with weapons, with training with us, how he presented himself, his professionalism as a soldier and as a motorman. And when he had enough of something, he let you know, and he did it in his own way. And I could go on an entirely different story about how he presented himself while we were in Afghanistan.
Keep going. I mean, David was one of your NCOs?
Yeah, he was.
Wow. No, keep going with that.
I served with him directly. And I remember he was having troubles while he was in Afghanistan. He wasn't getting paid. I remember being at Kandahar, the Air Force base, before it was overrun. And he was not receiving pay. And I noticed that he wasn't with the platoon anymore. So I asked him, I was like, hey, bro, what happened? Like, you're not with us. He's like, oh, I quit. I asked to be moved to the mailroom. I was like, that is very strange. Like, what happened? And he went on to tell me what was going on. He wasn't getting paid back home, and he had just had enough.
You think, Matthew? You think they might have bumped him up though, and when he went into the company?
I'm not sure what his promotion status was at that. I know he was in line for E6. I do know that, but I'm not sure any more beyond that portion of it. But he definitely just was going through a hard time while he was in Afghanistan. It was not easy to be there.
That was his second tour though, right?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. You can't blame him though, anybody, you know.
Well, no, because I got to the unit 3 weeks right out of basic training, and these guys had been together for a year and a half doing drills and working together and developing a camaraderie. So I showed up very late, and they all took me in under their wing, and David did especially, because we had a connection, because we were both very physically oriented, CrossFit, anything else, we would work out together constantly. And it was just a great camaraderie we had together. So,
well, it sounds to me like David had some cojones, because at the time, my husband, who, was military at the time, and when he got called up to, first it was Desert Shield, then Desert Storm, and we weren't getting paid either. And he was just I think maybe E3 or E4. So, we didn't have any money. And so when I'm back stateside, my husband's over there in the war, and we're not getting not only deployment pay, we got no, you're getting the basic pay of an E3. And he never stood up for it. I'm like going, I can't pay the bills. And you know how the military is. And I'm not going to get into that because it's a whole nightmare. But if the wife isn't taking care of things at home, then you need to yell at the wife. And it was all them. And so I kept telling my husband, you got to go talk to them. You're getting in trouble. I'm getting in trouble, and it's their fault. And he never did anything. But here, David, he had the cojones to go in there and say, okay, I quit. You guys aren't going to pay me. I'm done. Mm-hmm. That took a lot.
It did. It certainly did. And it changed the dynamic of the platoon, because I remember when he spoke to First Sergeant Christopherson, it was just like, Sergeant First Class Christopherson at the time. I mean, he was a fair and balanced platoon leader. He was a great leader. And even he was sad to see David go, but he didn't stop him. I mean, David needed to get out because he needed to get paid for what he was doing, and dealing with some of those guys who had been to the first insurgency of the Iraq War. They were under a different type of stress. For most of us who are just coming in to the military, they didn't have ROEs like we did when we went to Afghanistan. They didn't have that kind of rules and regulations.
They didn't have the intelligence then either, did they?
No, they didn't have a lot of the military intelligence that we have now, but it was a totally different aspect. The rules were different. I remember talking explicitly to some of the other soldiers, Eric Duplissa, who was saying, yeah, I mean, if a car rolled up on us when we first went to Iraq, we would shoot the engine block out with the 50 cal. We wouldn't even ask questions. And then all of a sudden you roll around to the time I went to Afghanistan, and we have to put out, ROE signs and raise our hands and throw rocks. It's like, it just didn't work.
Oh, man.
It was a very interesting time. We actually walked around some of the bases. We weren't even amber. Like we would walk around green with no magazines in our weapons. And I'm like, what are we going to do? Throw them at them? I mean, it just makes no sense. I mean, yeah, they got mad at us for walking around red a lot of the time, but we were in open desert for a lot of our tour while we were building FOB ramrods. So it just made no sense with the changes in the ROEs and the directives for the SOPs. It just
and you mentioned Duplessis. Now, do you talk to him about David? Because I've seen a photo or two of him with David. No,
I've lost contact with a lot of those guys. Actually, it's very interesting you mentioned that because one of my best friends out here in Alabama, we served together as well, and in Iraq and Afghanistan. So he's really one of the only people that I've stayed in contact with over the years. It's very strange how the military is a small world. You lose contact with a lot of these guys because the demons that we face for survivor's guilt, PTSD, however you want to look at it, we don't like showcasing our feelings for how people view us. Like that statement that she said in the book that he looked crazy. Well, that's a common stigma that most veterans get.
That's
and it's not always true.
And it's not always true. Like, I mean, I served in Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, do I look crazy to you guys?
No.
I mean, no. And you guys have talked to me on different levels through different communications. It's like David presented himself as a professional in the military. And whenever I put on the uniform, I wasn't just representing myself, just like David was. He was representing the United States Army. And we all took that into account. But just like in any profession, you're always going to have people who have the rank, but not the maturity, have the way of doing things, but not the understanding of how to treat people. So professional.
And not only that, soldiers are not, just they do not respond the same. Like, for example, when I was in Fort Bragg and I think I just passed my National Registry exam, and there was an accident on the tarmac. I can't remember which plane hit a C-130, right? So there were soldiers there, a big firebomb. You could see the smoke all over Fayetteville. So I'm looking at this going, oh, holy crap, there's something happened over there. And I couldn't get in until the next day. So when I got to the hospital and stuff, and of course there were injuries, just a massive amounts, just about anything you could think of. Most of them were burns, but I still remember seeing, as I'm going through the ward, that there were soldiers who, broken bones and limbs due to things flying, and those who had half their body burned off, and just how each one responded differently. It didn't necessarily depend on the type of wound they had. It was how they individually responded. There were some that were, catastrophic injuries, and they're just like laughing and joking. They're having a great time. And just one soldier who lost part of his ear and some of his face, catatonic for months. So, to have people lump like people like David or maybe even you and say, oh, they're just suffering from PTSD, they lost their mind because they went to war. It is such a miscarriage of justice. And to put you guys into that situation, it takes so much strength to do what you guys do and what you did. I don't think you guys get enough credit.
Well, and you should also get paid. I think we would all agree that you should get paid. And I'd like to hear more about that. How does David Crowley find himself in a spot where he is serving, where he's over here? How does that even happen where you're over there in harm's danger and you're not getting paid? I feel like I didn't.
It has all to do with the books on how they do their accounting. It was the same thing with us. My husband
really
wasn't getting paid either.
It happens a lot.
Happens a lot.
Wow. To add on to what Catherine was saying, to lump everybody into this little group, just like I know a little group called Conspiracy Theorists, all lumped into the same group.
Mm-hmm.
Indeed. One of the big things that was in the military, especially with financing, is that paperwork gets lost all the time. If you fill out a leave form and someone doesn't like you, they'll tear it up and make you do it again. If they don't like you, they'll lose your paperwork. I've seen guys change documentation just so that they can get into different schools because they're missing 1 point on their GT score or something like that. Like, just because we don the uniform, it doesn't mean that all people are, sunshine and rainbows and not going to cheat, steal, lie, and get what they need to get ahead.
Yeah, and if you remember, I don't know if how old you guys were, but when Desert Shield then turned into Desert Storm,